Our next speaker is Joshua Reams. He is a partner with the Elder Law Group of Ahrens, DeAngeli Law Group. Joshua's practice is focused on estate planning, asset preservation, and long-term care planning for seniors. He received his bachelor's degree magna cum laude from Northwest Nazarene University and his law degree summa cum laude from Willamette University College of Law, where he graduated as class valedictorian. Joshua is an accredited attorney with the Veterans Administration, as well as a member of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys, the Oregon State Bar, Idaho Bar Association, and currently serves as a chair of the board for the Greater Idaho chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Joshua's practice focuses on elder law and closely related practice areas, including Medicaid planning, elder-focused estate planning, veterans benefits, and incapacity planning. Thank you, Joshua.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Thank you, all of you, for what you do. I'm amazed at what a wonderful community we have here in Idaho for both healthcare and support and community. And I've always been a huge fan of Learn and what you do. So thank you for allowing me to be a guest today. So I'm going to share my presentation here. So please let me know if you see it. Can everybody see this screen?
We do.
All right.
That's great.
Okay. So this is an area that honestly, I really had no idea what elder law was going into law school. I knew I didn't want to do criminal law and wanted to work in civil litigation. And I started working for a firm that did a lot of civil litigation. And we started getting case after case after case of financial elder abuse. And at the time, I was working with a firm in Oregon where I was going to law school. And in Oregon, they have a statute that says if you steal from an elderly person, you have to pay 3 times the amount back plus attorney's fees. It has a lot of teeth. We don't have a statute like that here in Idaho, but it opened my eyes to a world of incredible people, probably the most amazing clients I have ever worked with, but who often had, cognitive concerns and were being taken advantage of by family members or by other people in their lives. And it was just a real big problem. And it's why I started working in elder law over 10 years ago, was really because of financial exploitation. And many of those cases honestly could have been prevented, in my opinion, with really good planning. And so that's where I think really good education and prior planning can be helpful for many, many seniors and their families. So today I'm going to talk about the silent crisis, navigating financial exploitation and the rising cost of long-term care at the same time. So we have this double-edged sword of folks who are losing money due to financial exploitation at the exact same time when they need it most, to be honest with you, when it comes to long-term care. The client landscape is changing, and this is no news to all of you. That's why you're here. But over 62 million Americans were 65 years of age or older in 2025, and that number is going to double in the next 10 to 15 years. And so put away the rest of my presentation for a second and think about our Medicare program, our Medicaid programs, our Social Security, our hospitals, our neurologists, like you name it, especially here in Idaho. We are quite frankly, woefully unprepared for the doubling of our elderly population. And it's why organizations like Learn exist. And why I exist is to help families navigate the next, 20, 30 years of long-term care situations here in the United States. This next statistic is really interesting to me. For the first time ever, there are 11 states now in the United States that have more elderly than children. And there's a few more states that are quickly going to join that number. This is a staggering number. And so we're seeing just a change in the landscape of America as we know it. Life expectancy for most seniors right now, for women, it's about 82 years. For men, quite frankly, we tend to do stupid things and die by 75. And so we see this longer life expectancy than we've ever had before. But at the same time, there are concerning things that come with it, whether it's the cost of care or whether it's this financial exploitation. And a big part of this is a decline in mental awareness, acuity, whatever you might want to call it. As the chair of the board of the Alzheimer's Association here in Idaho, this is a big passion of mine, is helping families understand what the landscape looks like, but also what community options and support are available to them. Over 7 million people ages 65 or older are currently living with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's, which those are official diagnoses, which we know that sometimes it's hard to actually get that diagnostic and to say, hey, I'm going to get a referral from my doctor. I'm going to wait for several months to go see a neurologist or, a geriatrician, and then we're going to do testing, and then maybe I get that final diagnosis of Alzheimer's. And so while we have 7 million, the more likelihood is that there's more than that. And in 2025, there was $384 billion of care costs associated with Alzheimer's and dementia and other related diseases. And we saw some of those statistics in Idaho in the prior presentation. This is a big issue that we are dealing with in our community, but across the country. And again, as our elderly population doubles, this will double with it unless we are able to find ways to cure the disease or at least have treatments for the disease, which there's some incredible things that I would love to talk to you at another time about some advancements that have happened in the last 24 months in this area. But there's a lot of work still to be done as we're looking at our elderly population. So let's talk specifically about financial exploitation and this rising cost that's associated at the same time, across the board. They're calling this the silent crisis of theft that happens at the same time when you need the money for care. So what I'm seeing as an elder law attorney is really eye-opening. So 1 in 5 people ages 65 or older report being a victim of financial fraud and abuse. But really what's disconcerting about that number is that for every one case that is reported, we believe that there's 25 more cases that go unreported. And you might ask, well, why? Why is that the case? Well, 9 in 10 who commit elder abuse are family members or other trusted individuals. And so it's really, really hard to report these cases because sometimes they don't realize it's happening. Other times I've seen many families who know it's happening, but they're nervous to report a sibling, a cousin, someone else who's trusted in the family who is committing financial elder abuse. In fact, one of the biggest cases I worked on early on in my career, when I was clerking for the firm in Oregon, we had a case where just the most incredible lady I've ever met. She had early onset Alzheimer's. She was in her early 60s. Her daughter moved in with her to help take care of everything. And what happened was daughter decided to take $3.5 million from mom's investments and go buy horses and travel the country to go to horse shows. So daughter wasn't even around to help take care of mom. And later on, other daughter who lived back east got involved and noticed that there was no more money to take care of mom. There was no money to take care of her in-home care needs, which was really a shame because they had worked hard to make sure that she had plenty in retirement to do so. And so in that particular case, the court appointed a professional conservator over mom's finances. And then we were hired to go get the money back. And specifically, the court ruled that daughter had to pay $9 million back to mom in that case. Now, did daughter have $9 million? No, she did not. But it's a good example of where, it's a weird family situation where daughter was exploiting mom and nobody knew about it for the longest time. And at the end of that case, what really broke my heart was that mom wasn't upset at the daughter who had been committing the financial abuse because mom really didn't understand what was happening. She was mad at the other daughter for getting the bad daughter in trouble. And so these cases get really sticky. And so even though we know it's happening, sometimes it's hard to find a solution. And sometimes it's hard to even have it be reported because families either don't know what's going on or don't want to get that other family member in trouble, and it causes a lot of strife. Last year, they estimate that about $36.5 billion were lost in financial elder abuse. Recent estimates show about 40% of Americans over the age of 65 are victims of some kind of financial abuse. Like this is a major problem in the United States right now. So one side of that coin is often abuse by caregivers or family members or someone who's close to the individual who has capacity issues. And these are the other things that we're seeing. So, I really, really focus in my practice on having specific powers of attorney to make sure that the right people are in charge that can help with financial issues and take care of their loved ones. But if a power of attorney is not drafted correctly or have the right kind of supervision, a power of attorney can be a huge tool for abuse, where fiduciaries, right, the agent who's named under the power of attorney, is misusing that authority to transfer assets or to change beneficiary designations or to close accounts. And really what's tough here in Idaho is that if a power of attorney is involved in some kind of financial elder abuse, if that is reported to the police department or quite frankly, even the prosecutor's office, my experience has been that their response is Well, that's a civil matter. If there's a power of attorney involved, we want nothing to do with it. You've got to take this to the civil court and go through that process. And so, because we don't have some of these other statutes, like Oregon, for example, does, it's really, really hard, to be honest, to bring a case against a power of attorney unless there's an ample amount of evidence. And so, you got to be really careful that you want to make sure that the people that you put in charge of your affairs, that they're trustworthy, that they're good with the finances, and that they're not in a position where they potentially could move assets or be tempted to move assets. I see that a question popped up from Garth, or a comment that a power of attorney can't change beneficiary designations. That is partially true and not true. So depending on how the power of attorney is drafted, Idaho has two very specific sets of powers. And the first set is kind of your generic basic, hey, I give this person the authority to pay my bills and deal with my insurance and my tax returns. There's a second set of authority that, if it is checked, and it doesn't have guidelines on it, actually does give a power of attorney the authority to change beneficiary designations, or to close accounts, or to change rights of survivorships on bank accounts. And so this is where I think good legal advice from an elder law attorney can be really helpful to a family as they get ready to sign those powers of attorney, to make sure that we're not giving authority that's not necessary, or that if we are giving extra authority, that authority has guidelines to it. So just as an example, in the powers of attorney that I draft, I have very specific language about like Medicaid planning and VA planning, and if a spouse needs Medicaid, how the movement of assets is allowed to be done. And one of the guidelines that we put in there is that assets can never be transferred from the principal, from the person who created the power of attorney, to anyone else, unless there is a specific power that says that. And even if there is a specific power that says that, we have language that says that that cannot happen unless there's a letter of recommendation from an elder law attorney who's saying that this is why this asset is being moved, why it's being moved, and that it's being recommended by legal counsel that this transaction occur. Because otherwise, that POA abuse can be rampant. And so I think a power of attorney is probably one of the most important estate planning documents in somebody's estate planning package. Like, I recommend everybody have a financial power of attorney. I have one for myself, but you want to make sure you have the right guidelines and pick the right person. The other thing we're seeing a lot of is theft by proxy, is what I call it, where we have either a caregiver or someone who is intimately involved in the care of the protected person, and they are either, taking personal property, or they are getting access to the bank accounts when they shouldn't, or somehow they have access to the checkbook for the person they're caregiving for, or quite frankly, they're charging for services that they're not supposed to. You can go online and find all kinds of people who are willing to be caregivers, and they may not be trustworthy. And that's why you want to make sure that you vetted the people who are coming into your house, and use agencies who are trusted and recommended by the community. And, our members have learned those kinds of things. But there are a lot of people out there who this is how they make money, is by, quite frankly, taking care of people who are easily subject to undue influence. I had this case a couple years ago that is still one of the wildest cases I've ever dealt with, where dad ended up needing some help. He had Alzheimer's. His kids lived out of state. The neighbors, who had been neighbors and friends for years, kind of stepped in and helped him with his paperwork. And then all of a sudden, they had his checkbook, and then they had his debit card. And, at first it was just they were helping. And then all of a sudden, dad moved into assisted living. And the family had reached out to me to say, hey, we're in charge of dad's trust. We want to help dad as he's in care now and pay his bills. But for some reason, the neighbors have all of his financial documents and his checkbook and all these kinds of things. And so I sent a very nice letter that said, hey, thank you so much for helping dad over the years. The family is eternally grateful. But please, we need you to return, dad's checkbook and his credit card and debit card. And they had a bunch of dad's farm equipment. And they absolutely exploded and called my office and cussed out my assistants. And it was just this massive blow up. Well, that's because they were using it inappropriately. And as soon as they saw that an attorney was helping the family, they kind of went into attack mode. And the reason why this case was one of the weirdest I've ever dealt with is the neighbors who were committing financial elder abuse. They actually hired an attorney with dad's money and filed a guardianship over the protected person. And they're not family. They're not named on his power of attorney. They're not his trustee. And it was in a small county in northern Idaho, where the court was not very familiar with guardianship cases. And so we actually had to spend a year in court trying to get that case dismissed because technically they didn't even have standing. They were neighbors. They have no legal right to be the guardian over dad. They didn't have any of the legal estate planning documents. All of those named his kids, and yet it took us a year to get them out of the situation and get that checkbook back. And so it was a big deal where at the beginning it was just, helpful neighbors, but unfortunately that turned into something much bigger and much more expensive, unfortunately. And that was really because of this idea of, undue influence, right? He was isolated, he was by himself. And then all of a sudden the neighbors were helping, but then they were getting gifts and all these kinds of things. It can really be a big problem. The last thing that we're seeing a lot of, and I'm sure you are as well, I have had, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 clients come in the last 2 weeks who have been subject to scams, right? I mean, myself, I can't tell you how many scam phone calls and text messages and emails I get a day. And some of them are extremely sophisticated. I don't know how many of you have seen, the text message about, hey, you've got a traffic ticket and they've had a case number and they have an officer who's listed on the case and you got to click a link and pay your bill so that way you don't get called to court. There's another one like this that's hey, you have a traffic, toll that you were supposed to pay and you didn't, and you're going to get in trouble if you don't. So click on this link. Another famous one right now is where they'll text you and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I had the wrong number. But then they use that as an opportunity to kind of build a relationship. And then they're texting back and forth with someone who's lonely. And then they go, hey, I've got this awesome, incredible investment thing that I'm doing. You've been so great. I just thought I'd let you know about it. And they actually will set up a fake account and show that, hey, if you put some money into it, look at all this investment that's working. You look at all the growth that's happened on your assets. Like, this is amazing. Like, you only put in $50, but now you've got 500. This next time, why don't you put in 5,000 and see how much growth there is? Well, once that happens, all of a sudden the person disappears and they've walked away with 5 or 10 or 20,000, sometimes 100,000. Probably the most popular informal scam that I'm seeing with my clients right now is the romance scam. Where there are vulnerable adults who are lonely, who need community, who are contacted by someone, and they build this kind of semi-romantic experience online, whether that's through Facebook or through text messages. And then they say, hey, I'm going to come see you, but I don't have the money. Can you send me a couple $1,000s for flights? And it just builds and it builds and it builds. I mean, I have seen families lose hundreds of thousands of dollars to romantic scams. Specifically, I have one right now where husband and wife, they're both still living. Wife has dementia and is really not doing well. And we need to apply for Medicaid to pay for her care. And we found out that she gave like $150,000 away in the last year and a half to romantic scams. And her husband knew about it and kept telling her that this was a scam and you shouldn't do it. And she kept doing it. And unfortunately, he didn't take any steps to kind of prevent that from occurring. And so now that we're in this middle of this Medicaid application, as many of you know, Medicaid has a 5-year look back period where they say, hey, if you've given anything away in the last 5 years, we're going to penalize you for it. And so we've gone through great lengths to have to show that the gifts that occurred over the last year and a half were theft. They were fraud, and there's an exception to the rule for that. But Medicaid requires a police report. They require a lot of other documentation to show that this was actual theft. And it's really made that Medicaid application extremely difficult. So we need to be aware that these scams are happening. We need to be aware that we're picking the right people for our powers of attorney. And we need to make sure that we're seeing what is happening in our families and in our community. This isolation combined with cognitive decline are really the primary catalyst for exploitation, especially in long-term care. This transition from kind of independence to dependency creates a massive blind spot, in my opinion, for financial oversight. And now we're in this such situation where we have this rising care costs that force families to tap into retirement assets quickly, or they're trying to sell assets, or they're just trying to figure out maybe even what mom and dad have. And all of a sudden, all this money is coming in and out of accounts to pay for care. And it's really, really hard to notice until months later that something bad is happening. I had a case about 2 years ago where dad was dying, mom had cognitive decline, daughter was getting involved, trying to help them out. Dad died, and mom moved into a skilled nursing facility, didn't have capacity, didn't have powers of attorney. They had no estate planning. So we helped daughter file a guardianship. Well, while we were doing that, son had access to dad's checkbook and fraudulently signed checks to himself for a period of about 2 months. Most of those happened after dad died. And it was something like $900,000 that was transferred out of parents' accounts to son while we are in the midst of trying to take care of mom. Once the guardianship and conservatorship was up and running, now all of a sudden we could see the accounts and we saw that all this money had left, and we were in the process of trying to do a forensic accounting. And then mom died. And so then we had to file a probate. And as soon as we filed a probate to have daughter be the personal representative, obviously son was not a huge fan of that. He knew exactly what was coming. So he contested that probate with his own attorney. And we spent like a year and a half fighting over who was going to be the personal representative. And then the court appointed a professional, and they just wrapped up that case a couple months ago. And in the end, son ended up getting less of an inheritance because of the money he stole. But that was really the only consequence to him, even though he fraudulently took, $800,000, $900,000. And so that in between period where we're trying to figure out what's going on, and dad was dying and mom needed care, it was an opportunity for him to step in and just pilfer the accounts. And so we need to be really careful. And a great way to avoid this is to plan ahead, to have good estate planning in place, to have good powers of attorney, to have the right people in charge, to have guidelines to what they can and cannot do. And that really helps compared to saying, hey, I put my son on the bank account as a co-signer. Now all of a sudden he's taking all of the assets out of the account. So we really want to have these discussions in advance, and we want to make sure we have a good plan in place. So some of the things that I'm looking for as an attorney that are red flags, we're going to see large ATM withdrawals. It's kind of activity that is not normal from their previous records. All of a sudden, all this cash is coming out of the accounts. All of a sudden, they have new advisors, these new best friends, new people that have not ever been involved in this person's life, who are not part of their normal, legal team or CPA or financial advisor. It's just a new person that has come out of the blue. We're seeing that all of a sudden bank statements and other mail is being redirected to like a caregiver's home address or to this other person or other family member who in the past wouldn't have gotten that documentation. Unpaid bills. This happens all the time where I see all of a sudden, a senior saying, well, I don't have money to pay for my haircut and I don't have money for this, this, and this. And I go, how is that possible? I can see how much monthly income you have. Well, it's because that money's being diverted somewhere else or someone else is spending it. Or they go, well, my grandson, I just feel really bad because he just needs help with all of these things. And he keeps coming to me for money. And so I keep giving it to him. And there's some really gray areas where sometimes we just have really generous seniors that want to help family members and need some good guidance on maybe that they shouldn't always be doing that. And then other times we have seniors who have cognitive decline that don't understand the nature and consequences of those decisions. Signature discrepancies. This is exactly what happened in that case in Northern Idaho. We could see on the checks that it was signed by, quote, the person who owned the account, but that person was in a memory care facility and didn't have the ability to sign documents anymore. And it was very clear that those checks were being fraudulently signed by the neighbors and not by the actual owner of the accounts. And then really when I see interactions with my clients where they're unable to explain recent financial transactions or legal changes, or they don't remember that they changed their will and gave part of the estate to this caregiver, those are major red flags that I'm looking for to say, okay, something is wrong here, and maybe we need to take extra steps like a guardianship and conservatorship to have the court give input and lock down the ability for anybody else to get into those accounts. And so as I work with families and as I work with other professionals, I do a presentation for real estate professionals all on red flags that we see in real estate transactions. The majority of our real estate owned in the United States is owned by our 65 and older population. We're about to see the largest transfer of wealth in US history over the next 20 years. And a big part of that is real estate. And so that is a key target right now for many fraud and scams, is to how do we get access to the real estate? And so trying to teach not just families and clients about this, but other professionals like yourself to say, these are the things that we need to be looking for. So as we're seeing this increase in financial elder abuse, we're seeing just a change in the landscape of care. And I know these numbers are not going to be new to any of you just because you're all in the industry, but this is what I tell my clients. I say, look, many of my clients say, look, I'm not going to need long-term care. Like, I'm going to live in my home until the day that I die. One night I'm going to fall asleep watching Jeopardy or Wheel of Fortune. I don't want to discriminate. And I'm going to fall asleep and not wake back up. Well, that would be great if that happened for many of us, but it's not. not. The odds of needing long-term care is 70% if you're over the age of 65, right? The odds of having your home catch on fire right now, as I, jabber on this morning, is about 1/10 of 1%. The odds of totaling your car is about 1/2 of 1%. And the odds of being hospitalized is about 8%. And so we look at the left side of those bullet points, and we all have home insurance, we all have car insurance, we all have, regular health insurance. And yet the odds of some of those things happening are pretty small. The odds of needing care is 70%. And yet many of the seniors that I work with have never thought about it. They never had that discussion. They have no idea that there's a very high likelihood that they might need in-home care or assisted living or skilled nursing. They all have friends that needed those things, but they're going to be the exception to the rule, right? That tends to be the impression that I get. So we have to make sure that clients and the families that we work with, particularly early on, and even in their 50s and early 60s, to say, look, these are things that are coming. What are we doing to prepare ahead to make sure we can pay for this care and have the right protections in place? Now, we know that, the cost of care depends on whether you're at in-home care or assisted living or skilled nursing. But right now, as determined by the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, the average cost of a facility in Idaho, where they take all the skilled nursing facilities and some of the assisted living facilities and they average them all together, is $10,901.03 per month per person. That number is absolutely staggering. Many of the seniors I worked with that have fixed income, $10,000 a month, even $8,000 or $6,000 a month for care. It's so difficult for so many seniors in Idaho to be able to afford. So what are we doing to plan for that? Are we talking about what future VA benefits might look like? Are we talking about what future Medicaid planning might look like? Do they understand that Medicaid's not for everyone and that many facilities either don't accept Medicaid or require private pay periods? Are we planning for a 2 or 3 year budget to be able to pay for private care before we look at programs like Medicaid? Do we have a financial advisor who's helping us prepare in our investments and our retirement accounts to make sure that when care comes, that it's not this huge emergency and disaster? For skilled nursing facilities specifically, your average resident stays for 2 years or more, according to the National Care Planning Council. So if you're thinking about the math, 2 years at a skilled nursing facility at $10,000 a month, that's $240,000 or more. Most families do not have that set aside, or even if they do, there's still a spouse who maybe is at home who needs the money down the road to be able to pay for their own life and their own care. And so making sure that we've talked about, hey, you've got this nest egg, but how is it going to use not just for one of you, but for both of you? Statistically speaking, the average long-term care for women in the United States right now is about 3.7 years, where the average adult male needs about 2.2 years of care. So what are we budgeting, whether we're female or male, with the spouses, how long do we need to expect to pay for care, and what does that care actually cost? At the same time, as we're trying to make sure that we're not losing our money to financial scams or abuse, because we know we need it for care. Private nursing home across the United States, about 129,000 a year. That's about 75,000 a year for assisted living. And inflation for caregiving is huge. It's incredible how much it has gone up in the last couple of years. Costs are outpacing seniors' income by 2 times the amount. And if you look at this graph here on my next slide, you can see kind of the rise in care cost. If you look at like early 2021, as COVID was hitting and we kind of come up out of the COVID slump, care costs have just skyrocketed. They've gone up 16% since 2022. So even if we are planning ahead financially for care, there's this inflation factor that's coming with it that it's hard to keep up, even for seniors who have done a good job planning ahead. All of a sudden, their dollar doesn't go as far as they thought. And it's not just care. I mean, if you go to Costco, I was at Costco earlier this week, it's like impossible, I feel like, to go get groceries and leave Costco without spending at least a couple $100s. And so all of a sudden, your normal everyday expenses are more than they were before. And when you're on a fixed income, that's really difficult to keep up with. So one of the things things that I want to end with today that I think is really important just in my practice, but really for all seniors, and I know many of you agree, is we have to have a good estate plan in place early and review it often. I tell folks that they should look at their documents every 3 to 5 years because assets change, spouses become ill, people, die or move. Maybe all of a sudden the child that we had in charge of our affairs is no longer available or no longer trustworthy, or something has changed where they're just not in a position to hold that position of power anymore. And so let's make sure the documents still say what you think they say, number one, but number two, that we have the right people in the right places in the right guidelines. The power of attorney that you probably had in your 30s and 40s and 50s is not the power of attorney that you should have in your 60s and 70s. Those documents should look different. They should have different language that specifically has to do with long-term care issues. As an example of this, we rewrote our healthcare powers of attorney after the statute changed in 2023, where we have specific provisions that specifically have to do with like memory care or driving privileges. Like, do your children, do your spouse have the right to take away your driving privileges? Do they have the ability to move you to a memory care facility if doctors say that's what you need? Like, that language is, one, really helpful, but number two, it addresses concerns ahead of time. These are conversations that families often don't want to have because it feels awkward, but they need to have that. I just saw a question that popped up that said, what are the advantages of a trust? Man, I could go on for a couple hours on what the difference is between wills and trust. And so I'm going to give you like the 10,000 foot view here because I know I need to wrap up in like the next 3 minutes. So everybody at a bare minimum should have 4 basic documents. They should have a last will and testament. They should have a healthcare power of attorney, an advance directive, and a financial power of attorney. Okay. That's the main 4. But as someone else just posted in the chat, is that the major reason why people do trust is to avoid probate. So if you have a will, you must go through probate. If you don't have a will, you're going to go through probate. But if you have a trust, you can avoid probate by putting assets into the trust. And that trust helps streamline the process. It allows for your trustee, when you die, to automatically step in without court involvement. Probably the biggest misconception that I have with my clients is people will come into my office and they'll say, I have a will, I don't have to go through probate. That is simply false. A will has no authority whatsoever until the probate judge says it does. If you've named the personal representative, or what we call an executor sometimes, that person has no authority to access your accounts or sell your property or pay your bills at all until the probate judge gets involved. Now, there are some ways we can avoid probate with like beneficiary designations and rights of survivorship, but if there's real estate involved, almost always that is going to trigger a probate, potentially in multiple states, depending on where you own that property. And so a normal revocable living trust is a great way to avoid probate. There's also all kinds of things we can do with that trust to build protections for special needs individuals, for children with disabilities. I have special protections in my trust for my 3 children who are minors. I have protections in other trusts for people that aren't minors, but we want to protect from divorce or lawsuits. And there's great ways to do that in revocable trusts. And then there's asset protection trusts, which I know that sounds crazy. Asset protection trusts, I think most people think of some crazy trust that's like in the Dominican Republic that avoids the IRS. I don't do those, and those don't work. So please, please, please don't ever do one of those kinds of trusts. The type of asset protection I'm talking about is for long-term care. There are special irrevocable trusts that protect assets in case of Medicaid and estate recovery. And they're very, very valuable for many seniors who are worried about long-term care. I saw another question that popped up really quick about what does it cost to go through probate in Idaho? Probate in Idaho, quite frankly, is so much better than any other state around us. Like Oregon and Washington have brutal estate taxes. If you have family members who own property in either one of those states, you absolutely need to do specialized planning to avoid the Oregon and Washington estate tax. We don't have estate tax in Idaho. California, known for one of the worst probates in the country, incredibly expensive and time consuming. And so when people move to Idaho, they go, oh my gosh, like probate here is so much easier. And that is true. But generally speaking, I tell families to expect 6 months to a year of total paperwork by the time we get through all the court hoops and jumps and notices and all the things we have to do. And that's usually going to range somewhere between $4,000 and $8,000. That's going to be attorney's fees, that's going to be court filing fees, publication fees in the newspaper. And that's assuming everybody gets along. In that case that I shared earlier, where the family members were all suing each other, all of a sudden now you have tens of thousands of dollars of legal fees. And that's not what anybody wants. And so it just, every family's different. I explain estate planning as like a toolbox, and everybody has different tools depending on what their family looks like, what their assets look like, what their goals are. Not everyone should have the same set of documents because everybody has different types of assets, different types of goals, different types of people that they can put in charge. And so the idea is let's talk about what tools can go in your toolbox, and then you pick whether or not you want to go through probate or not. You get to pick whether or not you want to have these other protections, or if you want to plan for long-term care through an asset protection trust. But at least let's have that discussion. For whatever reason, estate planning tends to be the number one thing that people just want to push out and push out and push out. And so many people think of estate planning as what happens when I die, which is partially true, but a huge part of your estate plan is what happens when you're still living, what happens from your 60s until your 90s, and what decisions are made. To some degree, I think we assume that we will always make our own decisions, and that is not always the case. And so we need to make sure that we have talked about who's in charge and who's going to make those decisions. It is a great opportunity to not only protect your legacy, but for you to tell us what you want. Tell us who you trust. Tell us what kind of care you want to receive. Tell us how you want your finances managed. Why leave that up to someone else's discretion who doesn't know what you want? Let's make it clear ahead of time. And when we do those things, the first half of my presentation, all of these financial elder abuse situations we deal with, so many of those immediately are removed from the picture because we have the right guidelines in place and the right protection. So I know it's 8:57 and I want to leave room for any other questions. My information is here, my direct email, my direct phone call. I always want to be assistance to the community. You can always reach out to us and ask questions. I do not charge for phone calls. I don't charge for emails, whether it's you or whether it's a future client. Like, I want to make sure that our community has the resources that they need, which is one of the reasons why I love Learn, because you guys are providing so much information to seniors that are needed. So thank you so much for your time today. I greatly appreciate it. So I think I just unshared my screen. And is there any other questions that I can help with today? All right. I know that was a lot, but I wanted to finish on time. So I apologize for vomiting on you for 30 minutes, but I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, we'll have that video up in a couple of, probably a week or so, and then everybody can go back and play it on slow. No. Thank you, Josh. That was amazing.